Good morning. Welcome into Unpaid Interns. It is Monday, November 30th. It is the first snow day of the year here in Bloomington. Always an exciting day on the calendar. And another part of the calendar, very exciting. College basketball is back. Both IU men's and women's teams both debuted in Assembly Hall last Wednesday. And we're going to talk a little bit more about IU women's hoops today. And we have the voice of the IU women's basketball team on the radio, Greg Murray, joining me this morning. Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Griffin. Another fine Monday, as you mentioned, snow, but here we are, the last day of November. I think we've been fortunate weather-wise, and it's basketball season, so feeling good here to start the week.
Very good weather this year. That's one good part, I guess, about 2020 and what's been a very dark year. It's a very exciting year, though, for the IU women's basketball team. They're actually picked to finish first in the Big Ten for the first time in program history. I mean, you've been around this team a long time, watched Terry Morin build up this program. Is this the highest year of expectations for this team? And can this team be that good and win the Big Ten?
I think so. I had one of the media votes throughout the conference, and I picked Indiana, not only because I've seen them firsthand on the talent that they have and the potential for this team, but also looking around what else is in the Big Ten conference this year. And typically, the way you look at women's basketball in the league is, does anybody have a chance to knock off Maryland? And this year, I think it's a real possibility, added with the fact that Indiana is, in my opinion, the most talented team in the league as far as their depth and everything that goes into Indiana. Maryland lost quite a bit from a year ago, so I don't know that they are the national power that they oftentimes are. There's a lot of good teams in the league, but I think when you look at the landscape of the Big Ten and how Indiana stacks up, I think they deserve to be the preseason favorites. Of course, Coach Morin and the players, and they look at it and say, that's great, but we don't really care, which is the way that they should look at it. It's fun for us to talk about it, but I think the potential is very, very high for this team. They're preseason 16 and 15 as far as the top 25 polls, and may move up a couple of slots as we advance here in the day. I think the polls will come out here in a few hours with a 1-0 start and some other teams losing. But the potential is high. A lot of experience on that roster, some star power with Ali Patberg and Grace Berger and several others. I think they can make a deep run. I say in March, I guess whenever the NCAA tournament rolls around this year, but I think this team's got a real chance to do some things that haven't been done in this program's history.
And a big part of this Hoosier team, I mean, they basically bring their entire team back. Brenna Wise, the only really major player lost to graduation, is obviously we've had one game, but a big blowout to an undermanned Eastern Kentucky team. Are you expecting, as the season transgresses, is this team going to look any different, or is it basically kind of going to be the same thing, same style of play we saw last year, essentially with the same group of core returners?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because in theory, you would think with the same type of, most of the same team, as you mentioned, no Brenna Wise, but everything else is the same, that it's going to be more of the same. And I think to a point it will be, but in our first coaches show that I have with Coach Moore, and we talk on Mondays throughout the season, she mentioned that they're trying to do some different things on offense. And how I took that is spreading the ball out, utilizing all five players on the floor, because at any given point, any of the five players on the floor can get you a bucket. It obviously starts with Ali Patberg running point, but also as one of the more talented players on this roster as far as her ability to score the basketball, distribute the basketball, and just generally lead this team. So I think it starts with Ali, but Grace Berger, who just had the triple-double in the opener, the first one in program history, is as talented as anybody in the backcourt, to me, around the entire league, and one of the best in the country as far as the guard positions. I think she's going to be more involved. She has the ability to play with the ball in her hands, but Mackenzie Holmes and Alexa Gulbe can both play down low, and both, at least according to what we've heard, Mackenzie Holmes has now the ability to step out behind the line. She didn't have to against Eastern Kentucky, so that remains to be seen. But I expect maybe a little bit more distribution as far as one day you're going to have somebody else lead the way, and then other days somebody else is going to lead. I don't know that it's going to be Ali Patberg scores 30 every game and Indiana wins. I think they have the ability to spread it out. And so I think we're going to see different stars each night. And case in point, we saw that on Wednesday afternoon. Not that Ali Patberg was bad. She wasn't. She had 18 points. But Mackenzie Holmes was 13 of 13 from the floor. Grace Berger had a triple-double. And that's the makeup of this team. They can beat you in a whole bunch of different ways.
A very deep roster, that's for certain. You mentioned Ali Patberg. No doubt she's the star, the captain of this team. What makes her such a special player? And, you mentioned the depth. They don't need her to, go off. But is it kind of the sense of maybe as people talk about Trace Jackson Davis on the men's team, kind of everything goes through her for how good this team is going to be, especially in, a big game such as against the Maryland?
Yeah, I mean, last year and I guess both years that Allie's played, Coach Moran oftentimes has said, the team is as good as Ali Patberg is. And she used that phrase when Tyra Buss was running the point guard position. Terry Moran is a former point guard, so her offense will always start with the point guard. And obviously the point guard is the one that starts the possession more often than not with the ball in their hands. But Ali Patberg runs the show on offense. Now, that's not to say that others won't help out and set up plays and do different things. We've seen that in game one, and I expected to see a lot of it. But Allie played 24 minutes in the opener. I expect that to go up once you hit conference play. I don't believe a starter even saw the floor in the fourth period against Eastern Kentucky. So the playing time will go up, but you'd like to see Indiana have the ability to take Allie out at times and have the confidence that even when Allie's off the floor, that the offense can still run effectively. And that can be with Grace Berger, Jalen Penn handling the ball, Chanel Wilson at times can come off the bench and run points. So you're trying to find a different piece in there that maybe you can give Allie a breather to make sure she's got her legs underneath her, when you really need a bucket in the fourth quarter down the stretch. So I'm still on the mentality that the team will go as far as Ali Patberg can take the team. But I think what makes this team different, even from a year ago, is that supporting cast has also elevated their game and can make up maybe if Allie has an off night or they have enough pieces to put it all together.
You mentioned a couple of the other key players outside of Patberg. Who is one that you would pick as an X factor this year, especially when they're going to be in some tight Big Ten battles?
Well, in close games, I always go to Grace Berger. I think her ability to create her own shot when she needs to score, she just does things on the floor that not every player on the floor can do. And with her skill level, she's smooth as far as her aggressive ability to go through traffic in the lane. If you've watched even a single game of women's basketball with Grace on the floor, you've seen her pull up mid-range jumper that's as consistent as they come. So down the stretch, I look for her just because of her ability to create her own shot and get a good look. And then I look to Mackenzie Holmes, the two that really shined in the opener. But Mackenzie going from a freshman year to a sophomore year, she can also do some things that not everybody else can do. And I mean that from a post player perspective. Her footwork is stellar. She has good, soft hands around the rim as far as receiving passes. But her ability to move around defenders, use both hands. She shoots right-handed, but I think I would say more than 50% of her 13 makes on Wednesday were using that left. So she's confident, has the ability to use both hands. So you have to play her different defensively. So those two, I guess, aside from Allie, stand out as far as who's going to lead this team in different categories and who maybe you can rely on to score a bucket late. But you also have Jalen Penn, who's a senior, who's hit numerous big shots in key moments over her career. She's a day one starter. I remember a couple years back out west at UCLA, which was a huge matchup in the non-conference. Jalen hit a three with under a minute to go. She hit a three-pointer last year to force overtime. I believe it was against Wisconsin. So she's hit huge shots in her career. So, you go down the list, that's 4 of the 5 starters I just named, which goes back to what I said is just, you're going to have to defend all 5 of these players on the floor because they can all beat you.
You look at last year, obviously a very successful season for Indiana, and certainly could have had a chance to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament before it was canceled due to the pandemic. The one thing, though, you look at that potentially needs some improvement, in their 6 losses in regulation, they had under 70 points, and there were a lot of long scoring droughts against Maryland, both 3 times they played them, actually. UCLA, another one I remember, just 4 points, I believe, in the first quarter, put them behind it, and that was a big non-conference game. What's the key, you think, to just avoiding those long scoring droughts that kind of have points plague this team?
Yeah, I don't know that there's one specific thing that you can just say, hey, as long as we don't do this, we're going to avoid scoring droughts. Just over the course of a season, you're going to run into some of those times where, some nights your shot's just not falling. And that's where Coach Moore, from the day she stepped foot on campus, has said, we're going to be a team that on those nights, we rely on our defense. And the defensive numbers have been very good. Indiana has been consistent on the defensive end that when you don't score 100 points in a game, you're going to be able to stay in it against the Marylands and the top teams around the country, even when you run through some of those scoring droughts. Now, when you're in the middle of those scoring droughts and you can, last year it came up much more than what you would like, more than just occasionally. It's all about just getting back to your basics and running the offense, doing the things that typically make you successful. It's not running late into the shot clock and forcing up bad shots. It's quick ball movement, moving from inside to out. If you have a good look, this team is talented enough to let it fly. Whether it's from 3-point land, although those shooting numbers were not great. They were last in the Big Ten in 3-point percentage a year ago. But just looking for good shots. And I think that's where you go back to the leadership of an Allie Patberg in the middle of one of these slumps to take a step back and say, okay, let's run something right here. Let's get a bucket. Let's keep it moving. Let's go inside to a Mackenzie Holmes. Let's get a good, clean shot and end the drought. And so you go back to leadership. But obviously, as any basketball team knows, some nights your shots just aren't falling.
Hoosier defense, you mentioned it was one of the best in the Big Ten, one of the best in the country last year, frequently a lockdown defense. What makes this defense so cohesive, and is there anything that Terry Moran wants to improve on defensively going into this year?
Yeah, I think there's always room for improvement, especially from a defensive-minded coach like Coach Moran. You're going to find things to nitpick after every single game, of course. I thought it was interesting in the first game against Eastern Kentucky. Oftentimes you don't take too much stock from some of these early games. Eastern Kentucky was short some players. They're not the caliber of team that Indiana will face very often this season, and they knew that. But one thing I did find interesting was in the fourth quarter that Indiana did mix up their defense. They're almost exclusively, at least in the past, have been exclusively man-to-man. And they opened up in a 2-3 zone to begin the fourth quarter. So that was with the second unit. Again, I don't know that a starter played in the fourth quarter in that game. So you saw Grace Wagner and Kiana Worthen and some of the Chloe Moore-McNeil, some of the newcomers, Danny Patterson, on the floor working together for most of that fourth quarter. But I'm curious, just as the season goes on, if that maybe is something that we'll see some of, more of a zone defense just to mix it up. But, to your point about why are they so good defensively, they've run the same type of defense since Coach Moran's been here, and everybody knows their role. Everybody has their assignments. They know where to be. They know where their teammates are going to be if they need help defense. They communicate well, and all of those things factor into being successful on the defensive end.
Nicole Cardano-Hillary, a transfer coming into IU, one name that got Hoosier fans very excited potentially is another addition, especially offensively. Yeah, you mentioned the struggles, three-point shooting. No, the team's still waiting on NCAA to rule on a transfer. When is a ruling expected? What's the latest on her, and what could she potentially bring to this team if she can play this year or in a future year?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't really have a good answer for you as far as the timeline. When it comes to these transfer and the appeal process and the whole idea of getting someone eligible, from what I've seen, and not only watching transfers come in and out of IU, but just around college basketball, I don't know that there's a set guideline of how long it takes. I know Coach Morin, wishes it was yesterday. As soon as possible, they'd love to, one, obviously have it approved and have Nicole on the team because I think she can add a whole lot. But just to have a ruling either way, this 50-50 unknown has got to be frustrating for the staff as you're running practices, because if she's not eligible, then maybe you work her in a little bit differently than say other players. But for Nicole, you have to imagine that she's sitting there wondering, am I going to play or in the next week, or am I going to play 12 months from now? So it's frustrating on all ends. I wish I had a better answer for you, but I've seen players that I thought were going to be eligible right away not be eligible. And then I've seen other cases where I'm not sure why they became eligible right away, but they were. So I don't know that it's a very gray area when it comes to the NCAA and transfers and everything like that. But we wait and see. I take it on a game by game basis. I have her on my spotting board when I broadcast, because I'm hoping that one of these games here soon that I'll be able to keep tabs on points and things like that to use Nicole. And I know Coach Morin wants to see her out on the floor as well.
Cardano-Hillary, she was A10 Player of the Year last year, all-time leading scorer in George Mason history with just 3 seasons played. What can she bring to this team from what you've heard and what you've seen in practice?
Yeah, offense is the big thing I've heard, just from her ability to score, coming from George Mason, which is, of course, a smaller school, but you don't score that many points by accident. So she's clearly got a terrific mind for basketball and a terrific mindset for scoring the basketball as well. So I see her adding into the backcourt, her ability to shoot from the outside to help improve that aspect of the offense. And she also brings in veteran leadership. Despite this being her first season with the team, she's been the star of the show at George Mason for years. She's been an all-conference player of the year. She's scored more points than anybody in that uniform before. So she's played a lot of college basketball. Both her and Danielle Patterson, although new on the floor for Indiana, they know what they're doing. They know what to expect when it comes to game day and what to expect with game plans and things like that. So I think that is invaluable. To have that kind of experience as you add newcomers to an already experienced team that, with the exception of the 2 freshmen, these guys have played a lot of basketball together, and experience matters, especially when you get to close games late or just late games in the season, postseason play. These guys have played a lot.
You look at the Hoosiers' schedule going forward, one more tune-up game with Samford on Thursday, but then a big one on the road in Lexington against a ranked Kentucky team. Little bit of a rivalry that Indiana fans know on the basketball court, especially on the men's side. Haven't played as much on the women's side, but certainly I think the biggest game in this early stretch, probably through the rest of the 2020 calendar year for Indiana. What are some of the keys that you'd be looking for that game on Sunday night in Lexington?
Yeah, that'll be a fun one. Ryan Howard is the name that you will have to remember for anybody going to watch that game. She is just a tremendous college basketball player. She was, by a certain media outlet, I can't remember which one specifically, but was preseason player of the year around the entire country. She's the leading returning scorer in college basketball from last season, somewhere in the range of 23, 24 points per game. So she's going to be bold, underlined, italicized on the game plan. as far as who Indiana needs to stop. But this is a really good Kentucky team. It's going to be a measuring stick game early on. It's not a must win or anything of that nature, but I think it'll be good for Indiana just to say, okay, you've gotten some preseason accolades. People think nationally you're going to be pretty good. Kentucky's another team that is going to be pretty good. They have been for years. You got to go on the road for the first time. What does that look like? It's going to be interesting, but I think you'll be able to stack up maybe of how good Indiana is, where they really need to work on, what they need to work on, and things like that versus these games against an Eastern Kentucky. I do think Samford will be a decent test. This is I think a much improved team talent-wise than what they saw last week with Eastern Kentucky. They played them on Thursday night. They went to Auburn and lost only by 2 at Auburn Arena. And Auburn's a very, very difficult team to play. They press and do some really different things. So that stood out to me. The box score just from Samford. They come on Thursday night. And then, as you said, Kentucky. That's the big test. You wrap up non-conference play with Butler, and perhaps there's going to be another non-conference game in there somewhere. I know the staff's trying potentially to schedule a 5th non-conference game somewhere in December before league play starts. But Kentucky's going to be fun. I don't believe that game will be at Rupp Arena. The women have always played at, I think they call it the Coliseum, but whatever the other arena is. So won't have that big venue of Rupp Arena, but obviously with no fans, it takes away some of the environment as well. But you're still playing on the road for the first time. So despite the opposition, that presents some new factors. But I'm looking forward to that on Sunday, no doubt.
The Big Ten schedule right around the corner, too. December 20th, Hoosiers' first Big Ten game against Nebraska. You mentioned you picked IU in your preseason media poll to win the Big Ten. What are you kind of expecting the conference race to look like this year? We know Maryland is that perennial powerhouse. They're down. Who else is going to be in the running with the Hoosiers at the top of the Big Ten?
Yeah, as far as teams to beat, as I said earlier, Maryland's always the first one you think of. Indiana has never beaten Maryland since they joined the league. So I know that the staff, I'm sure, is looking forward to that matchup. Northwestern was the co-champ last year during the regular season alongside Maryland. They had a phenomenal year with Joe McEwen. I know a coach that Terry Morin respects quite a bit. They bring back Lindsey Pulliam as an all-conference guard and in the running for player of the year, I'm sure, at the season's end. They bring back, I think, 3 or 4 starters from last year's team. So they're going to be a very difficult matchup. Michigan's always solid. They bring everybody back. Naz Hillman's one of the better post players in the league. So that's another team to watch for. Those are the ones that stand out, but it's just like any year in the Big Ten. If you're not prepared and you don't come ready to play, especially when there's no fans, if you don't bring the energy and things like that, you're going to go out and get beat. And especially now with Indiana, if they're picked as the favorites, well, they're now the hunted team. Everybody's going to bring their best when it comes to the Hoosiers and Michigan State. They play them twice. That's become a nice little women's basketball rivalry just going back the last 4 or 5 years. There's been some really, really fun games between Indiana and Michigan State. Of course, Purdue is always a difficult matchup regardless of talent level. So you'll take on the Boilers a few times. And so it's going to be a tough 20-game slate. But again, I think Indiana's going to go into the mindset every game with, we can win this game. We should win this game. But that's not to say that's not going to come without challenges, because Maryland and Michigan and those types of teams will be nipping at Indiana's heels, I expect.
You've been broadcasting IU women's basketball for most of Terry Morin's tenure. And I mean, we're talking about this team being the hunted, the favorite in the Big Ten. This is not normal for Indiana women's basketball, for a team that's never been to the Sweet 16 in the NCAA tournament, believes won 1 Big Ten title ever, and just does not have a history of success. How is Terry Morin really built at this point? You have to say a consistent contender in the Big Ten, and one that's, a lot of people are talking about could make a run all the way to the Final Four this year.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch because of that progression. Year one, I think they were a game under 500. Not eligible for postseason play. Coach Morin's first year was Tyra Buss and Amanda Cahill's freshman season. And you've just seen steady growth every year, now entering year 7 from you make it to the NIT. They made an NCAA tournament, got beat in round 2 by Notre Dame. They played up in South Bend a few years ago. Well, then they make a deep run in the NIT and win it. That was Tyra Buss's and Amanda Cahill's senior season, and I think despite falling short of the goal to win the or to make it to the NCAA tournament, that was a tremendously successful season. It brought a new group of fans. You had 13,000 at Assembly Hall for that NIT championship game. It was a year that the men were done playing, so I think a lot of the basketball fan base drifted over, and that may have been their first real glimpse at, hey, this women's basketball team, they're pretty fun to watch too. Then you had obviously, a couple years ago, they then make it back to the NCAA tournament and go out to Eugene, Oregon. They beat Texas. They gave Oregon a fight, but lost that game out west, and were prepped and ready to potentially make at least a decent sized run in the tournament last year. They were going to be a 4 or 5 seed in my mind. So whether they hosted or not, they were going to have a good chance to win that second round matchup to make it into the second weekend. And you bring everybody back this year. So it's like stepping upstairs. You're just taking one step further as far as the success level for Indiana. And so that's why this year I think the expectations are higher than ever. And I think they have the talent to make a run like they've never done before. Now, whether that's the Final Four, whether that's just the second weekend, you're taking it. The potential is high. There's no doubt about that. And it's going to be really, really fun to watch.
Couple more questions for you, Greg. I was just kind of curious on a personal level. You were inside Assembly Hall for their season opener against Eastern Kentucky. Obviously, no fans. What was just the experience, being in Assembly Hall without fans and broadcasting in an empty arena of typically, even for the games I went to last season for the women, that can get very loud. And I mean, they have one of the best attendance rates last year, I believe, in the Big Ten.
Yeah, they're top 30 every year, and the attendance numbers are only going up. It was definitely weird, and I expected it to be weird. I was in my normal seat, just a few rows up from the floor, but we had plexiglass dividers. I didn't have the typical media sitting right next to me. We were much more spread out, socially distanced, those kinds of things. I was messing around with my crowd mic to try and pick up a little bit more noise. Normally I have it turned down because the fans can provide enough noise to make it sound as it should on the broadcast. I had my mask on, broadcasting, which brings up its own new set of challenges, but that's 2020. And when they go on the road, it's going to set up a whole new group of challenges because I'm not traveling. So that's going to be something we'll sort out, and we'll guinea pig things for the Kentucky game on Sunday. That'll be a first road game. Honestly, once I started broadcasting, I kind of lock in my own zone. And it's not that I didn't notice that there were no fans there, but I kind of went about my business as normal. And with the exception of looking around and not seeing anybody, I didn't broadcast any different or things like that, but it's a weird feel in Assembly Hall. There's no doubt. And certainly that's the downfall of all of this, right? With the success you're seeing with football having a phenomenal year. Women's basketball's got really high expectations. The men's team's growing, and the one thing missing is that fans aren't there to enjoy it.
Well, it's definitely a big disappointment. And we just want to go a little further on that question. I mean, you mentioned you're not going to be traveling for road games. Does your preparation change this year? Is there any different way that you're broadcasting or that your routine has changed from not going on road games, or obviously the unique environment at Assembly Hall as well?
No, I don't think so. I think it's more technically different than anything else of where I'm going to find the video, getting sound from the stadium, things like that. But as far as my board, my prep, all my interviews that I normally do, I'll go to practice before each game. I don't do that anymore. So I have to find different ways to get information via Zoom and talking to other people. So that's definitely different. But from a prep standpoint, things aren't all that different. It's preparing for a ball game, preparing for 2+ hours of basketball, and technically we'll figure out a way to make it work.
Well, before I let you go, I do have to ask you one question about IU football. And you mentioned their crazy season. Obviously, probably awaiting later today, big news on Michael Penix and his availability going forward. But what are your brief thoughts on the season so far for IU football? And what do you feel like they can do the rest of the way with a big game against Wisconsin coming up this Saturday?
Yeah, well, it's obviously been a phenomenal story. It's been fun to watch people nationally pick up on the journey that Tom Allen has been on with this program. You know, we've seen it being in Bloomington and covering this team. You've seen the growth year to year, but now it's a regular thing to have them featured on game day, and now they're in the top 10. So nationally, people are picking up and noticing what IU's doing. This week against Wisconsin is obviously going to be a tough task. I don't know that we know a whole lot about Wisconsin. The talent level is there, but obviously they haven't played all that many games and they've been stop and go. And they're the third straight team IU's playing coming off of a bye. I mean, I know it's going to be hard. I mean, it's obviously going to be one of the biggest tests, maybe the biggest outside of Ohio State that Indiana will face this season. Quarterback, who knows? If Jack Tuttle's the guy, he's the guy, but they have a great supporting cast around him. And in limited play, you know, he looked pretty good out there on Saturday. And I know the team has a lot of confidence in Jack. He was a pretty highly touted recruit when he came to Bloomington from Utah. They don't change the offense all that much if Jack plays versus Penix. As far as, you know, neither's a running quarterback per se. So it'll be interesting, but I think the team's ready to move on. If Mike can't go, and obviously if he's healthy and ready to go, then I think the Hoosiers have a great chance on Saturday.
Should be a really interesting game and should be a really exciting season for Indiana women's basketball as well. Greg, really appreciate you coming on and providing some great insight today.
No problem. Thanks, Griffin.
All right, that will do it for today's episode of Unpaid Interns. We will be back on Wednesday with another great guest. But until then, if you're in Bloomington, enjoy the snow. If not, enjoy your week after Thanksgiving as we move into December on the calendar. That'll do it today for Unpaid Interns. We'll talk to you again